You've been working on the Jordan Peterson case. You've released many videos on him, and so I thought it would be great to have you for a discussion today on because a lot of the ideas that you presented in your videos, lots of people are emailing to me about, and I receive emails every day basically saying, "JF, I discovered something on Jordan Peterson. You really have to know it." And honestly, at this point, I don't have time to read all of these emails, and so let's get it straight and let's hear it from Jared O. Is Jordan Peterson a shill?
Well, it's very possible that he could be. In fact, it's likely. And rather than putting it in my own words right now, I could actually just refer to this 8chan post, which I know sounds suspect, but it's got all of its sources cited, and there's actually pretty good reason to believe it. But I'll just read briefly from it now. It says, Jordan Peterson worked for the United Nations for 3 years and has ties to some serious globalist think tanks, specifically George Soros's INET, which is the Institute for New Economic Thinking, and CG, which is the Center for International Governance Innovation. He was a UN advisor to Jim Balsley, ex-CEO of RIM/BlackBerry, who was working on a UN panel called the United Nations Secretary General's High-Level Panel of Global Sustainability. This UN panel produced a document that is essentially a Marxist NWO blueprint, and this document was later built upon and referenced by a UN panel that John Podesta sat on called the United Nations High-Level Panel of Eminent Persons on the Post-2015 Development Agenda. Both of these panels laid the groundwork for the United Nations 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. Jim Balsley is the founder of CG and the co-founder of INET with George Soros. CG is partnered with and receives funding from INET as well as the Clinton Foundation. CG is a major Marxist globalist NWO think tank involved with the G20, and it even appears to have some sort of ties to the CIA. Jim Balsley had 2 additional UN advisors, Paul Jenkins and Simon Zedek, and a UN Sherpa, David Renals, in addition to Peterson, while working at the UN, and all 3 of them were from CG. The founder of the intellectual dark web, Eric Weinstein, is listed as an official expert at INET. So not only is Peterson tied to INET through Balsley, the intellectual dark web, they say garbage, he's part of, is the spawn of a Soros INET think tank expert. Rather than finish this, I'll just say Balsley, I think, authored the intro to Jordan Peterson's new book, The 12 Rules for Life. So it's not just some person that Peterson had some ties to a long time ago. This is a guy that he has close personal ties to even to this day. And also Jordan Peterson's book, not the book, Jordan Peterson appeared on a podcast a few years ago bragging about his experience at the UN, saying how he removed the ideological claptrap from this report, which he thought was published in 2013. It was actually, the report he worked on was published in 2012, but it was easy to get the reports confused because both of them mentioned sustainability quite a bit. The 2012 report actually has his name on it. The 2013 report doesn't. The 2013 one talks a little bit more about how we need to accommodate mass migration, but the 2012 one is more focused on how we need carbon taxes and central planning of the economy in terms of food production and research and development and science. So that's basically about the gist of it.
All right. And Mark, are you familiar with these expositions? I've seen in part also the Vox Day blog post. I had read it, and everything that's been talked about here. Is it your conviction that these are problematic? Because it seems that Jordan Peterson's involvement in these group was not primary. It seems that he was just hired as some sort of counselor. What's your take on it?
Well, as most people know, I'm no fan of Jordan Peterson. This stuff is actually really, really fascinating. I've not actually heard any of this before, but I think you can see from Jordan Peterson's approach that he's one of the people we were speaking about earlier who identifies some of the problems that the Western world is facing. He then gathers a huge number of people around him because the media seem to love him. He's been given a huge boost by the powers that be. He's been allowed to get almost a critical mass. And then when you look at where he leads those people, he leads them to a false salvation, down the destructive path of individualism, and in a very real way, a form of anti-Western hatred. And it's very, very funny. When I see people do this, and I've seen people do this before, everyone kind of gathers around them and they're saying, what do we do? What do we do? And then they're given this ridiculous false salvation, which is only going to damage the West to a greater degree. And the sad thing is, it's people who actually, if they were led to the right conclusions, might actually be able to make a difference. And that's the real danger of people like Jordan Peterson. It's also really funny that he keeps talking about how terrible identity politics is and how we should all embrace this sort of destructive individualism and just think of ourselves as individual units. I'd love to see him go to AIPAC or one of these Jewish lobbying groups and tell them how they shouldn't embrace identity politics and it should all be about the individuals.
Jared, you've been looking at the discourse of Jordan Peterson, and in particular at the fallacies he makes. Do you take issue with this refusal of identity politics by Jordan Peterson?
Yeah, I do. I think it's problematic, pun intended, because he basically takes, well, he, like Mark said, he acknowledges a lot of the problems, like he sees, he'll, like, say, for instance, he talks about race and IQ, right? But then he'll say, well, yes, I'm talking about it there. I talked about it, just talking about it for the sake of talking about it. He'll acknowledge that there's an anti-white identity politics which targets white people. He won't acknowledge any Jewish role in it whatsoever, but then he insists that white people have an obligation not to organize in their own defense against anti-white politics, as apparently doing so, according to him, would make them just, or, us, just as bad as the people who are targeting us. He says it would only make us the most successful exponent of our opponent's ideology. And the problem I have with that is he's basically reducing whiteness to an ideology. And maybe this is part of the individualism thing, but whiteness isn't an ideology. Whiteness is a descriptive term for our biology. And when he says it's an ideology, to me, that's not any functionally different than saying race is a social construct. So he acknowledges these differences between the races. He says, yes, there's a difference in race and IQ. Yes, IQ is the most reliable thing we have in terms of a psychometric, but it only explains 20% of the story, he'll state. So that leaves 80% of the story 80% of the story to be explained. And he'll say, well, these differences, these ethnic differences are really hard to dispense with. And no, it's not that they're hard to dispense with. It's that they're difficult to dispense with. He'll say these IQ differences have existed for decades. And maybe that's only because the IQ test has existed for decades, but the general intelligence that it measures has existed for hundreds and thousands of years. And it's not just that it's difficult to dispense with. Trillions of dollars have already been poured into dispensing with it. And I'll give him some credit in that he'll say it's not as simple as just pouring cash into it, but that doesn't mean there's not other things that you could devote taxpayer resources to, as evidenced by this UN report that he co-authored. And I get to the argument, maybe he didn't have a primary role in authoring it, but he brags about removing the ideological claptrap from it as though he had access to edit the entire document. So at the end of the day, even within the text of the document, it says this is the opinion of the panel. That they make no distinctions about this member agrees with this thing in the report, but not this thing. It says this is the opinion of the panel. He put his name on that, and we know that even if he doesn't, advocate handing out cash to poor people to bridge the gaps of inequality, he still believes in that type of thing because of what he slapped his name on with this UN report.
On the first point by Jared, I really agree. The problem that we're faced with white identity, personally, I'm like Fate Goldie in the sense that I would have never wanted to talk about white identity. I just wanted to live in a country where I trust everyone around me, and I trust that they are engaged in the same building of a country with me. And I would have never needed to talk about white identity if it wasn't that we are faced with organized groups on all fronts, including minorities that get together, LGBT people who get together, and Jews who get together and who are very efficient at impacting the political spectrum. Mark, is that a problem that you see in the result of the discourse of Jordan Peterson, this disarmament of white in a society that otherwise gets super organized on all other possible identity groups?
Oh, definitely. That sums it up perfectly. I mean, in my book, I said we face these two problems. We've got a problem of sort of extreme individualism within the white community. So we've got a complete atomization of our community. But then we've got all these groups coming into the West who retain their group think, who retain their in-group preference, their culture, their traditions, their heritage, the glue that binds them, and they stick together as a group. So we are this atomized mass of individuals who are scattered, and we're facing this cohesive and organized invading force. Now, the problem you've got here is Jordan Peterson is pushing this individualism, but who are the people listening to him? Well, it's not huge numbers of African Americans. It's not huge numbers of Muslims. It's not the Jewish lobby. They're not all sat listening to Jordan Peterson donating money to him. It is white people who would traditionally be attracted to a patriotic, traditionalist or nationalist movement. So what he's actually doing is he's pouring out this individualist poison to more or less solely white people, to those of European descent. He's actually exacerbating this problem, making it far, far worse. So what you've got is he is separating us further. He is beating the drum of atomization, but at the same time, he's only doing it for our people. He isn't even addressing people from other cultures, other racial groups, other ethnicities. So in my opinion, he's making the problem worse. And then when you compound all that by realizing that he is speaking to some of the most astute and, what do people say today, some of the most woke people in our community, that makes it even worse. Now, these people, as I said, would traditionally turn to a nationalist party. They would traditionally turn to a patriotic alternative, but instead they're listening to this clean your room nonsense and running off and dancing to the tune of individualism, which is actually going to make them the prey for these groups that are coming into the West as those groups become bigger and more powerful. And we see the end effect of this individualism, this atomization, with what we were talking about earlier, which is, of course, the grooming scandal. There you have a cohesive group of essentially foreigners who are preying on the atomized remnants of the white working class community. And as the predator group sticks together and works as a community, they get away with their crimes. And as the prey is atomized and scattered, they cannot gather together to oppose those who oppress them.
Callan says 12 rules. It's GP's new religion. Stay away. I agree with this super chat. This whole self-help thing. First, there's nothing new in it from Jordan Peterson. Secondly, it is, you won't live a good life by just wanting to be psychologically healthy. You need to have goals in life, and you need to think about your reproduction and which society you live in. And I think that's where Jordan Peterson fails. Struck my ad. Didn't Jordan attack Fate Goldie? No, I don't think he attacked her. I think he denied her presence in a conference. Leo Weiss says this guy is a leftist operative, only able to parrot lefty pole talking points, looking to splinter the movement. Papa JF, make him say the 14 words. So Jared, someone is accusing you of being a lefty pole operative. Can you tell us about your politics? I don't even know, actually. Are you a right winger? Are you in the alt-right?
Yeah, I'm in the alt-right. I actually, for people who aren't familiar with my history, I helped Christopher Cantwell out of jail when he was arrested at Unite the Right back last August. So I'm not like a National Socialist or a fascist. I'm an Austro-libertarian. I would consider myself ideologically like an Austro-libertarian in the Hans Hermann Hoppe sense. But these days I do a podcast about pro-white advocacy and the Jewish question.
All right,
and I am
wonderful.
very pro 14 words.
All right. A Fistful of Shekels says, Jared, say 14 words or vampire melt in Blackstone. Well, he did say that he was for it. Successful Wheelchair says, individually we are weak like a single twig, but as a bundle we form a mighty faggot. What is that super chat? I don't even understand. Anyways, guys, was there anything else you wanted to discuss about Jordan Peterson? I mean, there's so much to discuss in there, but was there any other branch you wanted to explore?
Well, one thing about, just to add on to what Mark was saying about Jordan Peterson's individualism, is he's not even really consistent with it. So he insists upon not even from a racial perspective, but from a perspective of principle. So he'll insist on individualism for white people in response to anti-white identity politics. But then he'll say, well, yes, these disparities in IQ exist between ethnic groups. And what are we going to do about it? Are we just going to condemn them to a life of poverty, to a life of low IQ, or are we going to find a productive place for them in our society? So he's a tactical individualist. We can't resist anti-white identity politics, but all of a sudden we have a collective responsibility to take care of these low IQ people that aren't a part of our society. It's just completely inconsistent, right?
I'm sorry, I was playing with the technical stuff here. I think that the IQ part, I mean, it doesn't necessarily order you to do anything. You could know that people have different IQ and you could not care about it. Personally, my goal is not an optimization of IQ in society. I don't know what you think about it, Jared. Do you think that IQ is a value to be maximized?
I think it's good to have high IQ people, but I think the case could also be made that there's a benefit in having a wide range of IQs in your society for the division of labor, right? Because if you had all high IQ people, who's going to want to push brooms and do kind of the physical labor type tasks that need to be done? At the same time, I don't think that would be an argument for bringing in massive quantities of low IQ people or people with an average low IQ, or really massive quantities of anybody of any IQ. I'm actually very I'm very conservative in my immigration views, but I don't know if IQ is the only thing that you would take into consideration, but it's definitely one thing that people value for sure.
I think it's a problem if you import people who have a radically different IQ from the average of your country. But personally, I'm for a convergence of the natural IQ that people need to go by, live, and make babies. And so sometimes our societies will drive toward higher IQ, sometimes it will drive toward lower IQ. Especially current society, in the way it is built, you need to be less and less intelligent to survive in society today. You don't need the intelligence that you needed 200 years ago, probably, because you don't need to think about anything. You just go to the grocery store, everything is done for you. And the division of labor also results in much less demand being done on high IQ people. There are very specific jobs that require high IQ, but the vast majority of the workforce doesn't even need to have the level of intelligence that was needed 200 years ago to build their own house, survive in nature, farm, plan ahead, etc. Quebec, $55. He has an important question. He says, what kind of attacks do people like Collett or Tara McCarthy face for speaking their minds? Mark,
Well, I mean, people who will have known my political history will have seen that all this that took place with Tommy Robinson the other day was at Leeds Crown Court. Well, I ran one of the largest trials to ever take place at Leeds Crown Court between 2004 and 2006. My co-defendant was Nick Griffin. I was prosecuted with 8 counts of incitement to racial hatred. He was prosecuted for 4. And that was because we were the original people who broke the grooming scandal. People talk about Tommy Robinson and Rotherham, but before Rotherham was the thing that everyone was talking about, we were breaking the scandal in Keighley, which is a small town just on the side of Bradford. And this has been happening for a long time. And I was in the BNP. We broke the news. We campaigned heavily on it. We got several councillors elected in the area. And we made a number of speeches in the run-up to the 2004 Euro election that we were both arrested and charged for. We won the case. We both were found innocent on all charges. And that set an important precedent that you were allowed to speak openly at private meetings in the UK, because they were all private meetings. So yeah, there has been arrest for me in the past. Obviously, I face the same problems that other people face. You know, I do get people recognize me occasionally. You know, I have had people at times, people from extreme left-wing groups come after me. I remember before one election, I had a grey BMW and they came to my house and they spray painted it with swastikas, which was really, really bad, because it's like, you're on election day, you're the candidate and you're driving around in a car with giant swastikas on the side. You know, try going to Asda to get your lunch with a car with a swastika on the side, you get some looks. But, you know, you get those kind of things happen. And obviously that's going to put some people off from getting in touch or getting involved with our movement. But the fact of the matter is, we're fighting for the survival of our race. We're fighting for the very future of our people. And if the worst thing that's ever going to happen to you is you're going to get a swastika painted on the side of your car, well, you've lived a charmed life, haven't you, if that's the biggest problem you've ever faced. So I think it's more than worth that. You know, the risks and the problems that we face are just par for the course. And if one day we do establish an ethno-state, we do secure a future for our people, the sacrifices we have made along the way will seem like nothing in comparison to that glorious day of victory.
Absolutely. The media attacks and everything, I've also been targeted by a lot of them. And I have to say, it calms down after a while. I mean, these people, they get tired and their methods, they end up not having enough imagination to ruin my life. And so at this point, the media attacks, they hurt more my family than myself. It's more like I have a friend who comes to me and says, Jeff, are you doing okay? I saw a terrible article about you in the mainstream media. And I said, no, I'm still the same guy. Just don't believe the mainstream media and look at me. I'm happy and there's no problem. And so often it really targets the people around you rather than yourself. And it gets better really with time. You learn to handle these attacks. And at this point, they don't hurt me at all. They barely ever hurt me. The name calling in the media and the false reporting and the false reporting about my past. One thing I found interesting, I didn't know that whole story about your trial, Mark, and I learned about it when I watched your video today, and it was pretty impressive to see that you got out of it being completely found innocent, and in fact it contributed to a clear clarification of the legal standing on this issue. Private discussion in the entire UK are absolutely not applicable for hate speech laws, right?
Well, it depends how far you go. If you're actually inciting some kind of violence or if you are calling for violence, but if you are holding private political meetings for discussion or educational purposes, and we basically made it so that was legal to speak your mind in those meetings. Now, speaking in public places is obviously different, but at the time it had a huge effect. I mean, you know, it's over 10 years ago now, so people move on, people forget these things, but at the time it did have a huge effect. And after that, the party did really bloom in terms of electoral support. In 2006, we became the official opposition on Barking and Dagenham Council, and we went from strength to strength, eventually getting 2 MEPs elected before the party took a bit of a nosedive after that due to sort of internal reasons, which would take like, you could write several books on what actually happened. So there's no point really going into it now because it's history. But that's another thing that I found very interesting about these Day for Freedom people, is that they didn't really want to discuss, as I said, anyone in the UK who had done anything for freedom in the past, or anyone in the UK who, more importantly, was having their freedom threatened now. And if I'd been organising that event, which obviously I wasn't, and I'm not saying I should have been a speaker, but the person I would have had front and centre there would have been Alison Shablow, because she's a very brave lady who wrote these songs, put them up on YouTube. Holocaust denial is not against the law in the UK, but they found her guilty of what they call criminal offence, and she sang them at private meetings. She should have been front and centre at that event, and she should have been someone that this group surrounded and tried to protect. Because if she goes to jail for singing those songs at private meetings in the UK and publishing them on YouTube, that will be one of the biggest miscarriages of justice and politically motivated persecutions in the history of the UK.
All right, Jared, have you been targeted for harassment or for defamation or other sorts of attack from the left?
Yeah, I have an article about me, Angry White Men, actually a slew of left libertarians from the libertarian movement have written articles about me, about how I'm a Jew hater and a Holocaust denier and all sorts of things. So I've had my docs dropped a couple times in Facebook groups. I'm no stranger to harassment from the left.
All right, a few super chats before we conclude. Apple Fritter says, Jared O, a good guy. Mark Collett, cogent as ever. To Papa's producers, get a Europass guard, aka Doom Guard, on if he's willing. I don't know him, but I'll have a look. Aztec Pride says, search Nick Griffin, blast the EU. He called out the execution of the Calergy plan in Parliament. The man is a hero. Truck My Ad says, Mark, can you get Jared in the gym? He has potential. A little arrow at the end. Guys, was there anything else you wanted to do in conclusion?
I could say that Jordan Peterson's wrong about the Jewish question, and he said that there's more Jewish geniuses than white geniuses or any other geniuses, that they're producing more geniuses than other groups, and he hyper focuses on the bell curve and the tail ends of the bell curves, while admitting the fact that bell curves are, denominated in percentages, and he never actually plugs in the actual total population size. And when you do that, you find there's 3 times as many geniuses of European descent than there are geniuses of Jewish descent. He doesn't talk about that. I think you said you're going to have Vox Day on the show, and he could probably go into that in greater depth. But that's if you assume the 115 Jewish IQ lie is true. And they're actually taking that 115 number from a study that looked at Jewish kids at a private school. And in the study itself, they said that it couldn't be applied to the entire Jewish population. But then even then, he's totally inconsistent in this, because in other places he says for the Jewish question, he says, how is it a bad thing to have people producing more geniuses for us? But then in the same argument, he says, well, being smart or being a genius isn't automatically a good thing. You can be a pretty dastardly, horrible son of a bitch as a genius. So it's like you can be a horrible son of a bitch, as a genius, unless you're Jewish, in which case it's automatically a good thing. I think there's probably a little bit of bias there.
I agree that people who do this argument, they have higher IQ, therefore their overrepresentation in the Nobel Prizes and mainstream media is normal. I say, first, the link between IQ and performance in the job system is very loose. And people tend to remind you that when we talk about other populations such as black people. But when it comes to Jew, they seem to assume the one-to-one relationship, and then see, everything is explained. It's not explained. Given the loose correlation, it's a very it's an explanation that lacks power. I have
especially once you start looking at, like, and sorry to interrupt, but especially once you start looking at disparities between high school performance broken down in terms of demographics and college admissions broken down in demographics, it starts to look a lot different. And people don't like looking at all this different data because they can just say, well, you know, Jews have higher average IQ, so that explains it. And you got performance envy, white man, which is not the case.
Absolutely. And as a scientist, I have myself a lot of experience talking to many Nobel Prizes. I know how to get a Nobel Prize. And I don't know if I should reveal this secret. I will. How you get a Nobel Prize is by going to give flowers every year and a little watch to the Nobel Prize committee. I'm sorry, guys, I revealed your secrets. I've talked to all of you. I know it's all you do, and I know what leads to the Jewish overrepresentation in Nobel Prizes. It may be IQ, but it's the kind of IQ that makes you go give flower to the people in power and go
excessive
say,
flower giving, for sure.
Your wife looks so beautiful this year. I'll see you next year. All right, everyone. Mark and Jared, thanks for coming. It was awesome. Have a great day.